Okay, so I am here with my dear friend and mentor and teacher, Najeea Leslie. And Najeea, thank you so much for being willing to have a conversation with me. You have been you've been in my life for a long time.
Yeah.
I think earliest as a yoga teacher way back in the day. Um, And then you taught at the studio that I ran, some Dana Karana yoga for a while. And my first like belly meditation, belly awareness, I practiced that with you in the Qigong practice. And then for the last several years, you've been a spiritual friend and mentor. Um, and that's been such a sweet and really important part of my journey, my growth. And I know you've been a teacher and a massage therapist and space holder and mystic in your own way. And yeah, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Um, well, I mean, first, I feel just touched in terms of hearing you like kind of recount our history. You know, um, I mean, it's been at least 10 years or more.
Yeah,
So you were just this youngster. You still are.
yeah,
But I feel touched by bearing witness to your journey and having this shared love that we have
yeah,
and unique connection that we have. I mean, there aren't very many people, at least in my life, that I can have the kind of conversations with that I have with you,
hmm,
um, because in part what we're speaking about is so intangible, you know. But in terms of introducing myself, I I just was thinking before we met about that because I knew that you would ask. And what came to me was the experience I had with my grandmother as a little child and how much that formed who I am.
mm,
And she just was a woman of the earth. She was um, a Lebanese born US immigrant. And she brought the old ways with her.
mm,
She was very connected with the earth. And she had a sense of healing that she imparted. In part, she touched us. So when I was in pain or not well or whatever, when I was with her, and I spent a lot of time with her, she would, you know, put her hands on me just naturally to hold me or hug me, or I would have leg pains, growing pains, she called them, and she would massage my legs. Um, and so I guess, you know, all the different things that I've done, all the different, paths that I explored, I think they started there.
mm,
There's something in that relationship and in her presence that just was so um, just natural.
hmm,
And I'm not saying everything was just great in her life. She suffered a lot. She lived through hunger as a child. She lost children. She lived in poverty. But somehow there was, I guess, again, I know, I think a naturalness. There was something intact there,
hmm,
her connection with the earth and with nature and her way of being able to relate to other people
hmm,
that seems to be really eroded in us, in our culture, in our times. So, yeah, so all the threads I've followed are, you know, somehow linked to that.
Yeah.
So I think a lot about my ancestors, my grandmothers, and especially my bloodline. So my mother had mentioned to you before we started the recording, and her mother and her mother. And then this grandmother that I was speaking of, Sito Sharifi, what was my father's mother. So I had a connection on both sides. But I feel like I'm like a bead on a string of pearls or something. And I think so much about what their lives were like, or what was alive in them. What did they, suffer through? What did they love? How did they cope? And there are things I understand in a sense now that I didn't in the past,
Mm.
In terms of loneliness,
Mm.
growing older, seeing the world change around you, watching the suffering, hardship, um, and the connections those women had with other women, and and other people, but especially the women. They always worked together.
Yeah.
And so when I was with Sito Sharifi, um, as a young child, so she was my daycare, when my mom was working, um, my mom and my dad, I just worked with her. And I wasn't really doing work so much, but I just, when she was working in the garden, I was there playing, work in the garden. When she was baking, I was there, or cooking or whatever. I didn't have special activities or, play dates. Although, she would take me to a friend's, they'd have tea together, and that woman's grandchild, there was
Yeah.
that too, but I was just woven into her life.
Yeah, she just took you along with.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
whatever she was doing, I was a part of,
Yeah.
you know? So that's my introduction.
I love that.
And then of course as I grew older and started to explore in life, I just picked up these threads of things that sort of resonated with that natural way of being, you know. I mean, she knew ways of healing. I mean, my brother told me, and I didn't witness this. He's considerably younger than I am. He told me one time he was really sick with bronchitis, and my parents were away, so he was staying with her, or we were obviously staying with her, but I may have been at school or something, and she did cupping on him with
Wow.
just little juice cups, juice glasses. And I imagine she lit a match and she put it in there, and I was like, whoa. And I mean, where did she learn that? Were they doing that back in Lebanon? Or because in rural North Dakota, where I was born and raised, there were a lot of immigrant people, that had their own healing traditions that they brought too. And I know especially the German community, they did a lot of laying on of hands and stuff. So she had, healing wisdom, not just from her ancestral lands and her home, but from the community that she immigrated into. So.
Mhm.
And this is a woman who's was illiterate in English and Arabic
Mhm.
and spoke very broken English. So she was very capable, despite the fact that she wasn't, educated.
Yeah.
So I could say as an introduction that I guess my life has been spent and is still, being used to try um, to live in that way, learn how to live in that way, and then also, how to live that way in this world. So there's a whole nother dimension to it right now,
Mhm.
you know.
Thank you. I'm just feeling a real sense of honor and, reverence for that lineage and for your grandmother. Just, and I'm struck by too and inspired that, what arises for you by way of introduction is your heritage. And, it's striking me as such a contrast to our sort of habitual ways of introduction now, which are like, what do you do? What's your doing? What's your means of productivity in the world? Instead of like, who are you connected to? Like, what's the web that you belong to?
Yeah.
Just a very different way of seeing persons, seeing identity, selfhood, seeing the world. And yeah, that's I feel like we already got a lesson from you. That's so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's potentially one of the main things that I've been practicing or working with in the last several years
Yeah.
is to, refocus my attention from what I'm doing and even maybe who I am to how I am being,
Mm,
you know.
yeah.
When we first were talking, and I asked you about what you've been doing of late, and you described your recent uh, um, endeavors. um, One of the questions I had was, or I think I made the comment about you being with people that you're working with. And I can, my sense of it is that what you described of being in an institution is a perfect symbol for what we're living through.
Mhm.
That all of life is, society and human civilization is trying to sort of um, uh, institutionalize or um, uh, control all of life.
Mhm.
Have it like really geared towards an end, to a profit or to a means to an end and all that. And so, you experience this on a day-to-day basis. And it just feels like we can't get away from that. I think there was a time that it may have been easier to take a break or, have um, take refuge somewhere. But, that's like the perfect place to explore this dilemma
Yeah.
and practice, despite that hardship, it's soul crushing. I know.
Yeah.
And yet, this is where we are. And so, your sense of being and your presence is really the greatest gift that you can give. It's hard. It's really hard, to watch people suffer, and experience your own suffering and still to not get caught in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things that I'm hearing or kind of feeling a rise in myself about that. And the thing that has really been a struggle for me is like continuing to ask that question, like, how do I want to be? How do I want to be amidst this circumstances that feel beyond me? And I have an awareness that somewhere in that is also like a level of like choosing my own suffering. Maybe not entirely, but like, one thing so just to be clear about where I am, I'm working as a hospital chaplain. And one thing that I had to get like right with in myself starting out was like, my natural stance is often has such a resistance and, this sort of warrior element that like can't not say the thing, that can't not, like, but wait. And as I was entering chaplaincy, I could feel how rigid and how much was going to catch on my being going through this, being a part of this institution. And I was like, that's just going to hurt me. That's just going to hurt me. And we've talked a lot about just like what it takes to be fluid, what it takes to be like water. And that really has been my prayer over this time. Like, let me be like water, like really asking that spirit to soften the edges so that I suffer less, mostly so that I can suffer less, also so that I can, clear out maybe things for other people as I'm moving through it. But yeah, I mean, I do really struggle with that. Like how do I want to be? And to the sort of identity piece, I was sort of feeling this while you were sharing about your grandmother. I've been recently thinking about like how often so much of identity formation kind of presumes that like we're the hero of our own story. And I see this a lot too I think I even probably utilize this. I see this a lot in sort of the spiritual industry, the wellness industry of like self-fulfillment, self-awareness. And I've been thinking more about like you were describing the string of pearls, maybe like that we're just not in a self-depreciating way, like not in a collapse, but we're just one part, we're just one part. And the things that move through us, I think I'm trying to have more play around like identity as very malleable and having a shape-shifting quality if we let it, and that many things can live through us at one time or over different seasons. And even just hearing how, like, feeling the presence of the spirit of your grandmother, like living through you, and whoever and whatever else before her, the land where she came from, the wisdom, the healing wisdom traditions, and sort of what is it? Is it a confluence, like where all the tributaries kind of flow together? Like we're all sort of these confluences, but it's not. It's not fixed.
No.
And
Life is fluid.
yeah.
And that's the whole basis of Taoism.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. Right. Yeah, this has also always been something I love and appreciate so much about our conversations is, we're coming from pretty different spiritual lineages as reference points, but there's often so much intersection, as well as things I get to learn from you. But is there more that you want to say about that?
Well, I mean, I think what you were speaking about is, again, it's like a perfectly articulating what we're occupied with, or you could say struggling with as humans. And yet, we have this other impulse or this other aspect of our nature that's really about not being an identity, as you were, just to use the language that you were. And so it's kind of confusing. I mean, it's not really, but it can be confusing to the rational mind, because you were articulating not being collapsed, and then not being too, I don't remember how you said it, but not being too fixed on this, whatever, this way of being.
Yeah.
And it's really great to have someone articulate it so clearly.
Thanks.
I mean, I would have, I mean, it sounds pretty accurate for what I experience. But when someone articulates it, like, you can kind of see into a space there that's kind of outside of that whole conceptual space or place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that for me at least, and I suspect this is pretty common for people and for both of us, we're so conditioned into this dualistic paradigm or worldview, that we find ourselves going back and forth like that. And when I mention the Tao, I mean, it's an example of a holistic, or a way of oneness. And when I speak about my grandmother, what I notice is that she didn't seem so divided.
Mm.
And that's not to say, again, that I'm not aware of that she would have suffering and pain and anxiety. I felt those things, I experienced them. I have memories, but it didn't seem like she was divided against herself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the important questions or things that I'm exploring a lot is, what does it mean for us to live in these times?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not living in the times that she was living in.
Right.
We weren't born and raised in the times and place where she was. We're living in a time and a space of just insane divisiveness. And we can't, so it's like we can't do it the way she did it. I mean, it's not going to look like that.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
almost like we have to step entirely out of it, that whole model almost, for something new. And I think that that's probably a good practice, or a good place to orient ourselves, or a direction to orient ourselves. A, a place we've never been to, that we really don't know anything about.
Yeah.
But we might know, for instance, that dualistic, perspective isn't what that new direction is. We can't know it within that dualistic perspective, because it's, well, our minds can't conceive of anything that's not, the construct of the mind or whatever. So
Yeah.
I
Which
just
know
feel
already.
like, yeah, it's all we can really do, I think, is just keep coming back to ourselves, and to the places and the spaces that we know create that kind of potential, or a possibility. It's almost like a birthplace, coming back to a place where life, um, I don't even know how to say it, but a wellspring. I mean, for me to come here to this conversation with you today is an experience I have with some other, groups and communities that I have this kind of connection with. I don't even know how to describe it, but we're all suffering so much. We all have so much hardship, and it just gets to seem impossible at times to continue. But when we come together, and when we come back to, I know you have communities and people and places that do this for you too, it's like drinking from that spring,
Yeah.
and and there's a deep compassion. It's like, I know how much you're suffering, and you know how much I'm suffering, not just with the circumstances of our lives, but the way we bear witness and then hold that in our hearts. It gives me goosebumps. It's like a double load of suffering. And we come together, but that's not what we're hooking up around.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
We're not, I mean, we may talk about that and acknowledge it, but we're plugging in. It's not like we're just plugging into each other. We're plugging in together into something.
Yeah. Right.
That is, it's like, what did Jesus say? When two or more are gathered in the name, and then what's the rest of the saying?
I am there, or so I too am there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then, of course, we're trying to do that. We're trying to maintain that connection, or that, tapping into that source. But it's apparently not a new phenomenon. It's easier for us to do it together.
Yeah.
That's part of being human. I mean, we're mammals, and we're wired to connect.
Yeah.
Physiologically, biochemically, the works.
Yes.
And then that that dovetails, I think, interconnects with our spiritual nature. I mean, because the spirit is its own life, or the soul, or whatever, however you speak about that. But it's living here in this human existence. And so we are subject to our biology and our genetics and our history. And I don't mean just scientific genetics, I mean our inheritance.
What I'm thinking of, and then I do want to ask another question, but just to that point of our spirit and our biology, it came up when you were sharing about your grandmother and the way she used physical touch, and truly was healing. Was truly healing. And I think the last couple of years I've had more awareness of those sort of mammalian basic needs that has, for me, really helped to sort of reframe, like, maybe some of that, like, individualistic, I'm the hero of my own story or whatever. Like, the example that comes to mind is with Coda, my partner. We have conflict, like any couple. And something we've really learned for each other over the years that wasn't like a natural, well, it probably was a natural instinct at some time, but it kind of got, conditioned out of me. But like, I remember one particular conflict we were having where I had, just for whatever was going on in that time, I had made kind of a conscious effort. Like, I wasn't gonna overextend myself for what I felt like was sort of overly caretaking or over functioning.
Yeah.
I've been doing some over functioning and it wasn't feeling good to me. And so I didn't feel angry about it, but I was kind of holding my energy differently. And, it eventually sort of crested, and like, finally I was the one to kind of bridge the gap. And what we learned was that there was this sort of biochemical trigger that meant that, like, without some sort of, like physical co-regulation, even just like a hand on the shoulder or something, there was kind of this unbreachable gap.
Right.
Unreachable gap.
Yeah, I get it.
And it only took a little bit of extension on my part for Coda to sort of be like, okay, you're here, I can be here too. And that was really good learning on my part, to be like, okay, from a, I don't know, maybe psychoanalytic stance, or, like everyone taking responsibility for their own stuff. From that perspective, I saw myself in the right, or whatever, for just like, I'm holding myself this way because that's what I need to do. And you're an adult, you ask for what you need or whatever. But from a biological, like nervous system place, it wasn't possible. It wasn't possible for them. And I had more resource, biochemically in that moment. And so, yeah, what was equitable was for me to extend.
Right.
And just kind of back to the, like, not to maybe overlay too much meaning, but I do think that kind of that's a microcosm of maybe what has been, maybe how our ancestors might have lived, where everything wasn't so siloed institutionally, or, like, where medicine was practiced by the grandmothers in the home, where they also did many other things, fed people, you know, had children follow them around. Instead of having to go to this silo to get our medicine and go to this silo to get our food. And there's so much energy that it takes to kind of get those basic needs met. We often aren't left with much capacity to do the human connecting. I find that has been a real strain in my community, and where there's a desire to like have more landing places of, you know, even just coexistence. Doesn't even have to be deep but just the coexistence, like where bodies are near bodies, it's harder to do. So
I'm just thinking about when you're saying that, how it impacts our brain.
Yeah.
How it gets wired in, you know, this kind of, I'd say, experience of alienation.
Right.
Becomes kind of normalized in a sense.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Especially when it happens over and over and over and over. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing that I was connecting that to is like, I'm someone who will often get caught in my little whirlpool of like reminiscent grief, like, oh, we don't have what we used to have, you know, we don't have those intact connections to lineage and medicine and, you know, the home based ways of caring and taking care, being nourished. And so I do get kind of overly reminiscent about that. And like one of the inspirations for these conversations is the like just periods when it just feels very bleak. And we don't need to like overly force this trajectory of the conversation, but it is kind of where I've been in this last season, and we've had a couple conversations through that.
Yeah, that was the invitation to this conversation.
Yeah, which is everything has been so good.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it will easily segue to that a little bit, like.
Yeah. I do have a little something to add before we go off in that direction.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just as you were talking, you know, this is the great thing about these conversations, is because it is like we were saying, you know, we're tapping into something, and just listening to you, it's like little threads of ideas and energy start to pop into the field.
Yeah.
You know, one of the thoughts that came up is something that actually came up recently in another conversation. And I don't remember exactly the context, but a long time ago, I watched this documentary about Ayurveda. And what it was is like kind of the history of Ayurveda. But what was, somebody had gone around India and done sort of like a survey of all these local, like sometimes family or village communities or regions, what their traditional healing practices were.
Mm.
And it was incredibly diverse. Incredibly diverse. I mean, it wasn't anything like what I've read in the books about Ayurveda.
Mm.
And I mean, I wish I could find it again because it was so interesting. But the point, the reason I brought it up is that I refer back to that over and over because our ways of caring for and tending to and healing, if you will, are so diverse. And then anywhere there are groups of people, they're going to discover really ingenious ways of addressing whatever comes up. It's sort of like, necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
You could say it like that, right? And so when you're talking about different silos, I just was, thinking about the incredible diversity of those different aspects of our daily life,
Yes.
And you were speaking to like the exhaustion that comes up and trying to manage all this. But I was also thinking about the loss of diversity, like what's happening in our ecosystem.
Right. It's
And
exactly
it is kind of that same energy. So I find it helpful to step back, look at a bigger picture and see like the microcosm and the macrocosm, and like what is the energy that's happening and it's manifesting at different levels. And it, maybe it looks a little different, but it's the same sort of impulse. And then this might seem like a leap, but I think it might be, informative. Again, when you were talking, and you and I have talked about astrology before, and I'm not an astrologer. I mean, just a casual, like, fascinated individual. But, the little bit that I know about Aquarius, which is the age that we're transitioning into, and from Capricorn is, Capricorn is Earth. It's the physical body. It's the manifested life. And, you were talking about, I think in a sense, the loss of diversity of life and of a loss of a way of life where we're really physically connected. We're really, connected with the earth. We're really have that our human animal nature is in relationship that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, and we need to work to preserve it. And I was wondering about, again, maybe new ways of interconnecting. And I know that there's a very strong energetic quality to Aquarius, and very different energy than Capricorn. And what I was thinking about is that potentially part of what we're evolving to is more ways of interconnecting.
Yeah.
At different levels. Where it would potentially mean that we're connecting at like a physical, human, and spiritual or soul level, more sort of holistically. I don't know. It's just a thought that came to me.
Yeah. I guess I can't help go to like technology with that, which is something, particularly people in my vein of things are we are very resistant to. And I guess I've been playing with more like, so, sort of that's the being like water stance, like resisting less. And kind of opening to like, yeah, this, I know it's been said in particular over these last 3 years, but like, we are connecting through if we want to say through the ally of technology. I had a conversation with a young trans man in the UK about like Christianity and spirituality, and like he just found me on the internet, and like what an incredible opportunity to connect that wouldn't happen if we were only reliant on the concrete or the physical.
World Wide Web.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think possibly one of the ways that it gets a little or it has maybe more negative consequences is like letting it be, or having kind of a smaller or collapsing fixation on just the technology, like that it's still, I feel like maybe because we're already kind of a disembodied culture, like
Right.
there is a kind of reduction to being so technologically focused as we are, but if we kind of let it be another sort of ancestral tool that's building on our other ancestral tools, that building on our body awareness, building on our, psychic traveling, and it's just an additional window, with still sort of a broad sensing awareness. I had a colleague in the somatics world describe this for me this way, and it really helped me like sort of relax my attitude around technology. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, when you were talking, what came to my mind again is that it seems like we humans, with our overly developed rational minds, tend to get fixated.
Right.
I mean, because what I was thinking about is before technology got so big, we were, and we still are, just really focused on materialism.
Right.
So, whatever is available, it seems like we're gonna, as a race, as a humanity, we're
going to fixate on.
we're potentially going to fixate on it. And I mean, I think that kind of points to maybe a deeper need, which is that we're only tapping a small bit of what our potential is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, my grandmother had volumes memorized because she couldn't read or write, recipes and phone numbers and all kinds of stuff.
Mm.
But we have intelligences, like vast intelligences, that are so important for us to be able to employ in order to be whole and live in right relationship to life. But we have this, one track sort of direction that we've all been conditioned into, a rational thinking mind. And that can only really do one thing. That's rationalize. And so we're trying to operate in life in a great, in my opinion, great handicap. Because all the rational mind can really do is help us see what the choices are and, categorize things. It can't really make choices. It can't really make informed choices, holistic choices. And so, I don't know, what are your questions? I can't remember some of the questions that you brought up before we started. kind of like, what's your practice these days, or things like that. Well, that's one of my practices, is trying to enhance my other intelligences, my emotional intelligence, my ancestral intelligence. There's the rational intelligence. There's my grounded body, earth connected intelligence.
Yeah.
And then there's the spirit, the lively fire kind of intelligence. But there's not much available for us to be, to be informed about those.
Right.
I mean, that's why our presence is so important, because we're doing, it may not be that very thing that you're focusing on, but you're really pushing yourself to go to the edge of something here. Because, you asked that question about the faithless faith, right? Like you said, when we lose faith in the journey itself, the question about, I don't know, how would you phrase that?
Mm-hmm.
Seems like that's kind of where you were going, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I find for myself that even in those times, and it's been pretty intense the last few months, the last year's been really hard. It's almost like the faith is just in me operating. It's not something I have. And I went through a period where I was really exploring that. What does that mean? Because my faith doesn't look like the faith of some other people around me that's really tangible. I just trust in this. I trust in that. My faith, I mean, I don't know. It's just what came to me is that it's just, I just keep doing it. I just keep at it. Like, for instance, this dark night of the soul, where everything just feels like, you're saying, is everything lost? But I still keep doing it. I still keep thinking about it. I still keep practicing. I still keep exploring. I mean, it just happens. And so it just feels like maybe that's not what faith is. I don't know. It's just a different relationship to that concept. But it's sort of like, I don't know, I guess I have a choice. But what else would I do?
Yeah.
I mean, what else would I do? Nothing else. I mean, I could say, oh, okay, now I'm going to stop doing this, and I'm going to become that like famous artist that I thought I'd be, or get that high paying job, or I couldn't, even if I wanted to. I'm not even, like, I have no. I mean, I guess if you put your mind to it and that's what you want, but it just doesn't have any meaning for me. I see people doing it that has great meaning, and they're bringing great gifts into the world, But my being, my soul, has its own journey. It's not really something that my personality can decide about. I've heard this: mystics are born and not made. Doesn't mean that one couldn't become more mystical, or I couldn't be more artistic or whatever, but I'm just thinking about this little phrase from the Quran. It's something like, God doth call unto God's self whomever God goes.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, it's not something we can understand, but I guess maybe underneath your question is just wondering, like, how do you just keep going?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you come to the wellspring with your friend, and drink.
Mm.
And you're asking, what nourishes you, the little things that nourish you. For me, it's the birds, feeding the birds. That's like kind of my main thing when I get up in the morning, get that bird seed out there, right? My friends are waiting for me and they're around. I can go outside often and just sit and listen to them, close my eyes. And it just is, I would say joy. Is it joy? It's just somehow when I hear them or see them, I feel that kind of sense I had being with my grandmother.
Mm.
Like I'm here and on the earth, and this is where I belong right now in this moment. It's not like I'm having any thoughts. It's a felt sense of my body
Mm-hmm.
and my nervous system, you could say. The way that my biology and my spirituality, or my, I don't want to just say psychology and emotions because that's a part of it, but there's something else that when I hear the birds, that other self, that understands that language.
Yeah.
It makes me stop. Whenever I hear the morning dove, I always stop and say my mantra. It just happens spontaneously.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel that sound is calling, and I saw that the morning dove is considered a messenger from God. It's like it's calling God's name or whatever, and that just happens spontaneously.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it. It's saying, praise God, Najeea. And so, I don't know however else we could, what else we need to keep going, but sometimes it's hard. But you create again, coming back to the intelligences and the mind, you're so creative. We're so creative that something, and when I say creative, it's not even like it's coming from me, it's just it's when we
Life-
take
life
ourselves
is-
out of those narrow places,
Yeah.
then we find ways. It's like we're finding ourselves in a corner, between a rock and a hard place. And it sounds cliche, all you can do is surrender, and what the heck does that mean? But it's the truth. And I don't think it looks the way we think it should look. I think it's potentially just a matter of admitting, okay, I'm in a corner.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like it, or I'm between this rock and this, hard place. And I want to say relax. It's not like you can really even relax, maybe, but just to stop fighting it for a minute.
Yeah.
And there's a certain part of this I sense is working with the nervous system, because that biology of survival is just running, when you're in that place. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Yes.
it's like you're nervous system, brain are perceiving those situations like a prior, prior existence where you would maybe be in the physical danger.
Right.
And that's a part of what we're dealing with. We've got a biochemistry and a physiology and a nervous system that's evolved for circumstances of life that aren't what we live in.
Right.
So we got this kind of this gap, and at a really just basic level, you could say one really important aspect of our practice is to work with that, evolve that. It may not be that we see really big changes in our lifetime, we might, but that we know we're going there and that we're doing our part or whatever we can to be in service to, our evolution.
Yeah.
And I mean the evolutions of our species, but I also mean our personal spiritual evolution. They're just like this right now. And the stakes are high. They're getting higher. And the heat is, getting turned up. So, we're gonna have a tougher time. We have a lot tougher time. And, our ancestors and even our teachers, from our lineages, the circumstances weren't what they are now. So in some ways, we have to lean on that, but we have to, or I don't know what we have to do. We also, it seems like we're being pushed into, stepping off the cliff, and with, you call it trust or faith or whatever, or just letting go, to knowing that that's all behind you. I don't mean this, you put it behind you, but it's all that thread, that string of pearls is, you're still connected to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that, you just have trust that will guide you, and guide you in that, in your relation, your relatedness to the one, to whatever you call it, God, or to life. It's like those practices and that history is our I'm going to say training, or our refining. We're refining ourselves, not to just be able to do that, to be able to, like one of the Sufi masters said when the Mongol hordes were invading, and his students were like, he said, I get goosebumps. I've been training you to be ducks, now swim.
Mm-hmm.
Or the baby bird getting, having to fly out of the nest.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds really lovely, but then, we're going to turn our computers off and we're going to go into the kitchen or whatever, and there'll be some thing going on that, but, this becomes part of our wiring and our memory as much as those hardships. So we just have to keep playing.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then there's the part about our relationship to ourselves that came up, but I don't think we have time for that today.
I know. I feel so much more like generating from hearing you share. So as always, we'll just have to have another
conversation. But I do think it's worth just honoring, that our relationship to ourselves.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean cultivating a relationship with ourselves that's like the way we're trying to cultivate our relationships with other people or with the world around us, like you were mentioning with your partner and your insights.
Yeah.
So it's a different relationship to myself. Not so that I'm such an individual, I don't need them, but that it's just that there's some basic need met within me
Yeah.
and my need for connectedness. Because even in the best situations, I mean, you know, you see what babies and children deal with. It's, you know, you still deal with, you know, needs and desires that can't necessarily be met by other people.
Right.
And anyway, next time.
To be continued. Yeah. I
Um,
think maybe just one last like illumination or connection to that I can share from just this last season and to the surrendering and all that. I remember saying to one of my other mentors, like, I know I just need to surrender to this time. And I just can't. I can't. Like, I hate it. I don't want to be here. You know, and there was all this judgment I felt towards myself, and you know, I shouldn't be here. And what she offered me was just like, I surrender to this moment. I surrender to this moment. That it doesn't have to be like a grandiose anything. But I surrender to this moment in a way, saying, as you were saying, both with like being in a rock and a hard place and just saying, here I am between a rock and a hard place, and no shoulds or judgment necessary, but also just like the birds, you know, here I am. I am here on this earth, and I guess I'm connecting that back to how you're describing relating to ourselves, cultivating a relationship with ourselves the way we would with others. And in that moment with my partner, being able to kind of feel under what I thought about the situation to like the energetics and the nervous system needs of it. And just like, okay, I can't change the nervous system needs going through the darkness. I can't change the like terror in my body if I don't acknowledge that it's there. If I should, or, you know, judge or ignore, it's not gonna, there's no relief for that. So anyway, I'm just making those connections and appreciating the kind of bigger insight about that. So,
and maybe that the terrified part just needs your attention and love.
right.
know?
Right.
I mean, it's just, I find it's not so natural for us, but it's just changing our perspective a little bit. You know, like what I heard when you were talking about surrender just a moment ago is, oh, we think of surrender as something we do, but maybe it's just turning towards it.
Mm, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
I can't surrender, but maybe it's not my job to surrender, you know, maybe it's not my work, maybe it's just turning towards it or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you said, you just reached out and touched, you know?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I definitely feel like we've drunk from the wellspring, as always, Najeea. Yeah. So I'm deeply grateful for you and for where you come from and all the wisdom you have to share, and just the companionship. You know, we've been on this journey together.
Just a real treasure.
Yeah.
It's a blessing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.